No, in between recordings, Kurt was saying maybe they didn't know what they had with like Final Fantasy 7, 8, 9, 10, even 6, 5, 4. I don't believe they did. I don't believe they've ever quite known what they've had with Final Fantasy. I think they're, I think they're making the game somewhat reflexively from a creative standpoint. Like, just approaching each title organically, like, hey, what do we want to do now?
Yeah, what
and they
technology
just make
do we have?
Yeah, what technology do we have? What do we want to do? And they're telling stories that they want to tell, but they're not thinking about it in terms of this huge overarching series. So, they'll bring stuff back from time to time. Sid, obviously, airships, fighting the final boss in a nebulous void, summons. There are recurring elements throughout the series, but really they're just approaching it from one game at a time. You have your team working on the next game, of course, while this game is being worked on, but still, it's just one game at a time. It's like, basically, they didn't need to be Final Fantasy VIII. It could have been a whole other game. It just happens to be in Final Fantasy, and so they can reuse this element. But it still gives it that coherent feeling, because it's being made by similar teams at the same place, who have worked on previous titles, and they are drawing from what came before, but they're just allowing it to stand on its own. But it feels like at a point, and I think this was the point, Final Fantasy XII, where they started making Final Fantasies with the philosophy that this is, the 12th game in this series. This is the 13th game in this series, not this is the next game in this series.
I'm trying to think of another series that has lasted nearly as long. I'm just not familiar with, like, Suikoden or whatever it's called. So I'm, like, I wonder, like, just to find another series that has even somewhat as many titles as Final Fantasy, like Dragon Warrior or something. Be like, did they know? Like, are they more consistent? Like,
Oh yeah, I feel like the Dragon Warrior / Dragon Quest series is probably much more consistent from title to title. Probably to that game's detriment, or that series' detriment. As I've said before, I've tried playing Dragon Quest 8, I think the PS2 one.
Yeah,
and
fuck that game.
I can't do it. I can't fucking do it. It's just miserable because they haven't really modified the game, other than the graphics and the presentation, all that, in 20 years. At this point, 30 years now. It's basically the same game it was back on the NES, with all the fucking NES jank you would expect.
Like, just those, I can't do the battles. Those battles where it's just
terrible.
Like, they're just the enemies facing straight at you, like you're in an old dungeon crawler. And
Whenever I look at any kind of like RPG maker, that's always the default setup, is like you've got the monsters in front of you and like you're looking at them. Like, I don't like that at all.
It doesn't do anything for you. Like, it's not, oh my god.
Yeah, I know. This is just how the Viera dress and live, and they're all just women.
But there's no advantage to having a game like that. It's not like, oh man, it makes me feel like I'm fighting them. It's like, I don't want to. I'm playing these characters. I want the characters to fight them.
Yeah. So that one is that. So Dragon Quest, at least from what I've touched of it, I've never actually played one to completion. It does feel like that series is more consistent from entry to entry, but to its detriment. Final Fantasy, there are always significant changes from title to title. They're really sequels in name only. Like, as I've said before, there are themes and some gameplay elements that recur, but other than that, they're their own standalone games. You could easily call any one of them by its own title, and it would make complete sense. But at this point, with 12, I think they became... they started thinking like of the 12th game in the series, the 13th game in the series, the 15th game in the series, whatever. But I think they also started to become self-conscious about that fact.
They all have incredible hair.
Yeah, they do.
They all have super trendy, beautiful hair.
It's just this perfect race of bunny warrior women.
Like, they all just sit around and like hairdress each other. Like, what's the cutest hair we could think of today? Like, one all had straight bangs and stuff, and it was like, and like that one's got like a short kind of crop. That
it's like a short crop on the sides, but it's long in the back. That one has kind of a pixie cut.
I've heard the voice of the wood. She says Miern is not in the village. Jote, where has she gone?
Why do you ask? The wood tells us where she has gone. Or can you not hear her? You cannot. Your ears are dull from hearing their harsh speech, I think.
Vaughn's just like, is that racist? They're racist against us.
And Balthier looks at him and kind of just nods a little bit, but like with a smirk, like he's proud of it.
It is the will of the village. Viera must live always with the wood. So is the green word, and so is our law.
Balthier's listening to this about how they have to live with the wood, and he's just like has to run away for a minute.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about, you were saying Ash's thighs looking a little bit bigger, and then I'm thinking about those little bells of cloth that I pointed out, and maybe that's just maybe that's kind of her shape thing, is like that sort of bell, like her hips are wider, those bells around her calves, like around her arms, like. I mean, she was a princess. I don't think she was super active. You know, maybe meant to be.
Yeah, and those bells, they kind of give the shape. Well, the ones on her arms and her legs, they're kind of like the old like turn down boots.
Yeah.
So they give her kind of an active look, I suppose. Kind of a seafaring look specifically. For some reason, that look is always associated with like pirates and sailors. Maybe the bell shape in general is kind of supposed to be like almost like a regalness, like a gown. The way you see, like it comes down and it kind of comes out.
Yeah. I heard 50 years ago.
And the way that a lot of bells have the thin top and then they widen out.
Bells are always so fancy.
Yeah. She's very ornate, even though she's just wearing like a dishcloth. But to get back to a little bit about what I was saying, once I got to here, it did feel like they started to become self-conscious of the jokes. Like, oh, it's Final Fantasy like 1 billion now. Oh, there's so many sequels. Even though every sequel isn't really a sequel.
Yeah.
In the way that we think of sequels traditionally. And I think they lost the thread, and they probably had a purge of. I would have to look at what their lead rosters were like in terms of their creative talent and whatnot, but I think they suffered a loss of creative talent at some point, and then brought on new people who didn't quite get it. Yeah. We see this with any sort of institute. Oh, this part.
What Yote said, about how you said the same thing 50 years ago?
Your point?
Bringing up her age, and she's all pissed.
How old were you again?
That's all he has?
Yeah.
That's all he has to add to this whole thing? Is he's just like trying to picture how old she is. And he's just like, you fucking
nice
kid?
Vaughn.
Like, you fucking kidding me? You make Balthier lose his composure? Like,
everyone shits on him.
Like,
he exists only to be shat upon.
Like, even Balthier being like, nice, dude, like not having anything like any quips or any like he's just like, dude.
It's so far beyond the pale that even Balthier is like, dude, come on. But we see this with any sort of institution that has a huge surge of popularity, a high bar of quality, but then overstays its welcome. Doesn't necessarily overstay its welcome, but if it's around long enough, the people associated with it, the people who made it popular, will go elsewhere, and then people will be brought on who love the thing, but don't get it the way the original creator. We see this with The Simpsons, where the first 9 seasons, fantastic, incredible. Like, they put work into every single joke in every single episode. They're not all huge winners, but there aren't, significant valleys, but then there's a huge, and if you watch Super Eye Patches Wolf on the video on The Simpsons from a couple of months ago, he explains that around season 9, which is when you see like the ratings for the show, like just start to plummet. Not the ratings, but the reviews for individual episodes. Whereas before I had an average of like 8.8 per episode, it suddenly starts to just crater. There was an exodus of the main writing staff within 1 to 2 seasons, and then they had to replace all these people, and the people they replaced them with don't seem to understand what made The Simpsons The Simpsons. And I feel like something similar may have happened with Final Fantasy, because this was 2006, and that was 19 years after the series had started. So whatever creative staff may or may not have hung around since the beginning was probably gone at this point. And so you're bringing on new people who probably understand Final Fantasy, love Final Fantasy, but don't quite get it, and are beholden to sort of the baggage of the series, to where it's like, oh, Final Fantasy, like it's all this other stuff that came before. It's like, no, Final Fantasy is always its own thing, despite being a sequel. It just has nods to the previous entries, but we're thinking of it as that. They're starting to be self-conscious. And so they're really starting to mix things up in ways that just aren't interesting.
I remember specifically reading about the 13s and whoever directed those, just the popularity of the Call of Duty games, and they specifically quoted how we were trying to, capture that audience, and it's just like, you don't get it. Like,
this has its own audience. Final Fantasy is capable of selling 5+ million copies because it's that popular and it's always been that good, but because it appealed to that audience, which doesn't get a lot, appeal to it. The Call of Duty fans, they have Call of Duty. And a whole bunch of other shit. Like, I never looked at Final Fantasy and went, man, I wish this was more like Call of Duty.
Like, that's
and then the business aspect of game making also started to intrude, like that, where they started trying to make games which were smash hits in their genre. The producers, the executive producers, the people with the money are like, okay, we want to sell copies like this other thing entirely, specifically Call of Duty. Ever since 2007, Call of Duty has been the fucking the hare that all these companies have been chasing, even when they don't make things anything like Call of Duty. And so they make, like, we even saw this with Resident Evil 6. They tried to make it more action-oriented, like Call of Duty, and that game is terrible. But then that one also happened to be the best-selling Resident Evil in the entire series, so go fuck myself.
It's just ridiculous. I don't think people realize that the big draw of, like, why Call of Duty sells so much, because in order for it to work, everyone has to play it. And that's what's fun about it, is, playing. No one cares about the campaign. It's playing online with a bunch of people. And so, like, that's why you sell copies. You don't play online against people. With Final Fantasy, like, I don't know, it's just, I know that doesn't exactly make sense, but the way I'm trying to say it is, like, it's just different. It's a different game. Like, it's a different experience.
It's a different game. It's always been its own experience. And then when they lost sight of that, the whole series began to suffer, which is like with 15. That's why it took 10 years from its announcement to come out. It's because they kept, like, remaking it. And you're like, well, what is this game? There was no unified vision or direction, because they were trying to make it, it'll be part of this great big, like, alternative universe within 13. Or no, now it has to be its own thing because 13's not selling as well as we thought. They went into it without a unified direction, and the whole thing sucked because of it.
What is she doing? She's, like, really...
Oh, yeah, this is how limit breaks work in this one, is each character learns 3 limit breaks. They have a level 1, level 2, and level 3. You have whenever you learn a limit break, you gain what's called a mischarge. So when you learn your first limit break, you have 1, your second one you'll have 2, you learn their third and final one, you have 3 mischarges. When you use those, you'll select either their first, second, or third level limit break, and that will use an equivalent number of mischarges.
Okay.
And the third one is obviously more powerful, but it uses them all up at once. And you're able to chain them together one after the other as long as the character has mischarges. Now, it's slightly randomized. Whenever you'll select your first one from here, and then we'll go into that cutscene mode, and all the available mischarges to that character will pop up on the right, but they'll be randomized based on the ones that they have. And so it might be either level 1, or the level 2, or the level 3. So even if you have, like, 2 mischarges, it might offer you the third level one, in which case you can't use it. But you can press a button to re-randomize it. So it can offer you their first or the second level charge. It can also give you the option of a mischarge, where it will refill their miss gauge, at least for the duration of that cutscene portion, so that even if you completely deplete their stuff, you can then refresh it, and there goes Pinello with her
just doing
katana calisthenics,
holding the blade as she's stretching.
She's doing her katas, but and as long as you're able to recharge it within the time, because you only have 5 seconds total, but every time you use the charge, it pauses the timer from wherever it was counting down. you can chain missed abilities technically infinitely. Eventually, you'll just run out of time. You won't get offered like the ability to charge anymore, or you won't be quick enough. But you can chain them again and again and again. If you chain enough of them, you get a non-elemental finishing move, which the more you chain together, the more powerful that finishing move will be. I don't like the system. I don't like the way it works. The fact that it's so randomized means that you might just get completely screwed out of your ability to really do good damage with it. And then you really need to chain together a whole bunch in order to do good damage with it to begin with. I'll often use it as a finisher if I think I can maybe do enough damage to get an enemy past their enraged portion. But other than that, it's not all that great. I'm sure some people know how to just break the system and manipulate it, but I don't.
Is it you?
You can tell she's younger because her ears aren't 8 feet long.
And she's got the short hair.
Yeah. She's got that that Trunks bowl cut.
Yeah.
That Bulma gave him right before the Cell games, but then they forgot about once they got to the Cell games, and so he goes back to having long hair. That was the worst. That was maybe the worst animation mistake I've seen.
That's pretty bad.
And they make a point of it where Bulma's like, I gotta give you a haircut! And then he's got the short hair, and then cut to Cell games, and his hair is back to being down around his waist.
I had to discover why they had come.
So you came here hoping to find something out and got yourself caught.
Alright, I thought of another series.
Yeah.
Like Resident Evil, like you can mention that. Like,
And sit close beside me as
that seems like, yeah, that did pretty much the same thing Final Fantasy did, where it's like Resident Evil had like a real golden age where you're like, this is a Resident Evil game, and then they got to a point where they were able to really change it up in a great way, and people were like, this is amazing. I'm sure a lot of people didn't like 4.
Well, oh yeah, there was a lot of skepticism around 4 because it went from because it did become more active, but they managed to keep it. They managed to make it active while keeping the soul of the game in there. Like 4 is still a very tense game.
Yeah, and
it's not a power fantasy,
and it's like,
Do you still carry it with you?
and that's like,
Sure.
man, that's the one everyone talks. I mean, 2 and 4, or you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like 1,
well,
2, and 4.
because they're effectively the high points of different eras. Like 2 is the high point of that fixed camera tank control style, and then 4, when they completely changed how the series works, was just a watershed moment of like, oh, okay, you can make this game in this fashion and have it still feel like the old one, where I'm still scrounging for ammo. I'm still considering every encounter. You do fight far, far more in 4 than you do in any other one, but you're being tactical about it. You still feel on the edge of your seat. It's not, 5 started to lose that thread, and then 6 just became a complete power fantasy.
Like 4 is like kind of like the parallel to Final Fantasy X, where they changed it up so much.
Yeah.
But they're like, oh, this works.
But it still works wonderfully.
And then they, from then on, for the next few entries, they fucked it up.
Like, this one isn't fucked up, but
What is that little swirly hair one? That's
I don't know.
neat.
Yeah, it is neat.
I heard the woods.
Like, this one's not fucked up, but there are stories from its creation to where it's clear that this vision was compromised.
Yeah.
This is not the game that they originally
Meddling.
sought to make.
There's, the meddling that you're talking about.
And so it likely suffers forever for that. We'll never know. Maybe the original vision would have been worse. That's entirely possible.
Stand and do nothing at all.
All we know for certain is that the original vision was meddled with.
The wood alone is for us.
And then,
But that is
and
wrong.
they, like,
How can we just
15
hide
is
here in the
quite
trees
different.
when all the
And,
world outside is on the move?
supposed to be really good. Like,
I too wish
people
to
like
live free.
15.
Yeah.
But it's just
To
like,
leave this
But
world.
15 is,
Do this.
it's quite different, but it's clear that eventually they just had to kick it out the door. Because even they were still fixing the game's story up until a couple of months ago. I think they only recently released that patch that fixes like chapter 13, where apparently it's like a whole bunch of shit happens, but you don't know why any of it's happening because they forgot to put why in the game.
and then, like, it's also obvious that 15 came out, like, there's just so many games, open world games.
Oh,
Like, just
yeah.
so many. Like, and it's like that was the hot thing for a while, so it's like,
Solitude.
you could still see Final Fantasy trying to hop on board with
everyone,
instead of just making a Final Fantasy game the way they want.
Like, what was the original vision for 15? Was it more like this, which is slightly open world, but not in the sense that we think of open world? Like, this is just a big space for you to go explore.
I could have swore I remember when it was 13 verses, it was going to be a lot more like Kingdom Hearts.
I think so, yeah, from what we saw in the trailer.
Instead, it is somewhere between Kingdom Hearts and 12, which doesn't quite fit. Like, it's just kind of odd. It's not, you don't have as much control, but then it doesn't, then the game itself doesn't have as much control. It's like in this weird middle ground where you're like, okay, either make it more turn-based and it's more just like waiting, or give me more control over the action.
Frankly, I wouldn't mind if it was an ATB gauge, but you're running around manually, like evading stuff. But then when your gauge fills up, it's like you can just choose to pause it, take your action.
See, and there's a mode in 15. It's called wait mode.
That's right.
It really pisses me off because that's the only way, at least as far as I know, that you can use, what is it, Libra to scan enemies. And it's like, I don't want wait mode in this game that's supposed to be all action packed. Like, I don't want to. Like, just like give me one or the other. Like, make it all waiting or make it all action.
Make it more Bayonetta or make it more Final Fantasy traditional ATB system.
The wood longs for you.
God, I really just
another line that Balthier is just like, gotta go away. I'll be behind this tree.
Yeah. And then late at night, Balthier walks in wearing that outfit, and he's like, the wood longs for you. She's like, not now, Balthier.
Oh.
It's been a big day.
Oh, of course, I was just just joking.
I wish Vaughn would make things awkward again by asking how they reproduce. So you're all women, right? Yes. So you have a concept of gender? Yes. But you're all women? Yes. How